On May the 7th, 1964, a Pacific Airlines flight bound for San Francisco International Airport was minutes away from landing, but would never reach its destination. Unknown to everyone was the fact that on board was a 27-year-old man called Francisco Gonzales, who was armed with a .357 magnum revolver, who was intent on ending his own life and taking everyone else with him. Gonzales then stormed the cockpit and began shooting. His actions, which resulted in the deaths of 43 people, is still the worst case of mass murder in Californian history. Welcome to Tales of Tragedy. Today, we travel back exactly 60 years to 1964, right in the middle of the golden age of air travel. Taking a flight today is still exciting for some, but for many, it's mundane, and it's usually associated with long queues, airport security, delays and general stress. With over 4 billion passengers flying around the world in 2023, it's also a mode of transportation financially accessible to a large proportion of people. However, in the 1960s, air travel was a luxury reserved for the affluent due to how expensive tickets were. As an example, today, you can buy a return ticket from Chicago to Phoenix for under $70, but in 1969, this same trip would have cost you around $1,200. You did, however, get a lot for your money back then. Once aboard, all services were complimentary, and with a much lower ratio of passengers to flight attendants, you could expect your every request to be fulfilled straight away, whilst tucking into your gourmet meal. Flying was seen as such a luxury that people dressed for the occasion, often wearing their best clothing for their trips. Cockpit doors existed in the 60s, but these were flimsy and usually made from balsa wood in an aluminium frame, and were predominantly installed to provide an office-like environment for the pilots and not to protect them from attackers. They were almost always left unlocked. Showing how unsecure the cockpit was, I read a blog post of a man who was an airline pilot in the 60s who recorded an incident on a flight from New York to Boston where a fight broke out in the cabin, and whilst the men were throwing punches, they tumbled into the cockpit door, knocking it off its hinges, and carried on fighting in the flight deck, with the captain having to separate them. There was also no airport security. Taking flight in the 1960s was akin to taking a train. You turned up, bought your ticket, and would then board the plane. Whereas now, you have to arrive at the airport hours before your flight, in the 1960s, some people turned up as little as 30 minutes before takeoff. It seems as though airlines thought everyone who flew at this time was mentally stable, and there was no way that anyone would do anything to jeopardise their lives or those of their fellow passengers. This is a mindset which is almost incomprehensible today. We are all fully aware of the dangers that exist in the world, and the evil people who would use planes to maim and kill thousands. However, this mentality, during the early stages of air travel, would be a fatal mistake and result in the deaths of over 40 people when an evil and selfish man called Francisco Gonzales decided that he wanted to end his own life and was determined to take as many people with him as possible by crashing a commercial airliner. Francisco Paulo Gonzales was born on the 26th of January 1937 in Manila in the Philippines. There's not much written about Gonzales, but it appears his early life was filled with promise. He was part of the sailing team that represented the Philippines at the 1960 Olympics in Rome, but after this highlight, his life rapidly deteriorated over the next 4 years. In the months after the Olympics, he and his wife moved to San Francisco, but he struggled to get work, eventually ending up being employed in a warehouse. By 1964, Gonzales was deeply in debt, with over half of his income going to pay loans, and his wife had asked for a divorce. Why he was in this financial situation is not clear, but one report I've read indicates it was due to gambling. Relatives and friends later told investigators that Gonzales was, quote, disturbed and depressed about his marital and financial issues. This is an understatement. It appears that Gonzales was becoming unhinged and dangerous, and by the middle of April, beginning of May 1964, he was talking repeatedly about his intention to end his life, and he even threatened to take members of his own family with him. As time progressed, his statements became more specific, with Gonzales saying that he was going to take his own life on either Wednesday the 6th or Thursday the 7th of May 1964. On the 6th of May, Francisco Gonzales bought a Smith & Wesson .357 Magnum revolver from a friend of his and then travelled to San Francisco International Airport. Gonzales showed the gun to several people at the airport. It's not clear who. Some reports indicate it was random members of the public. Others state it was friends of his who had travelled to the airport with him. He also told these people that he was going to shoot himself. However, regardless of who these people were, it seems there were opportunities to stop Gonzales, but no one did anything, and so this unhinged, suicidal man, armed with a gun, stepped onto a flight to Reno, Nevada. Before boarding, he'd purchased life insurance, naming his wife as the sole beneficiary of the policy. It seems that Gonzales was not ready to die yet, and had actually purchased a return ticket, flying back to San Francisco the next day. When Gonzales arrived in Reno, he went from casino to casino, gambling all night. The casino employees spoke to him about him gambling heavily, but Gonzales said that, quote, it would not make any difference after tomorrow. Several people later stated that they saw Gonzales walking around Reno, carrying a small package under his arm, assumed to be the revolver, and the box with this weapon and a gun cleaning kit were found in a waste paper container at one of the places he visited. After spending his last day alive pissing away what little money he had, in the early hours of Thursday the 7th of May, 1964, 27-year-old Francisco Gonzales, still armed with a revolver, travelled to Reno Tahoe International Airport to board his return flight, Pacific Airlines Flight 773, which would never reach its destination. At 5:50 a.m. on Thursday the 7th of May 1964, Pacific Airlines Flight 773 was awaiting clearance to take off from Reno Tahoe International Airport. The plane was a 5-year-old twin-engine turboprop Fairchild F-27, which had accumulated 10,250 flight hours. On board were 33 passengers and 3 crew members, including 52-year-old Captain Ernest Clark, a Nebraska native and World War II veteran. He'd been with the airline for 17 years. He had over 20,000 hours of flight experience. He'd also lost his wife the year before this disaster and was a single parent to 3 daughters. Second in command was 31-year-old First Officer Ray Andress, an experienced pilot with over 6,000 flying hours under his belt. He was married and had 4 children. Lastly, there was 30-year-old flight attendant Margaret Schaefer, who was also from California. She was the mother of a young child. The mood in the aircraft was positive. This was a routine flight to San Francisco, with a stopover at Stockton Metropolitan Airport. The passengers were settling in for the first leg of their journey, unaware there was a killer amongst them. Francisco Gonzales, with the revolver in his pocket, had chosen a seat directly behind the cockpit door. At 5:54 a.m, Flight 773 took off from Reno and made the short half-hour flight to Stockton, landing without incident at 6:28 a.m. 2 passengers alighted and 10 boarded, bringing the total number of passengers and crew to 44. At 6:38 a.m, Flight 773 took off from Stockton and climbed to 5,000 feet before heading towards San Francisco, its final destination. We will never know exactly what was going through Gonzales' head, why he decided not only to kill himself, but over 40 innocent people, including a child who was just 3 years old, and why he had chosen this second leg to act and had not done so sooner. However, what we do know is that 6:48 a.m, 10 minutes before landing in San Francisco, Francisco Gonzales burst into the cockpit and began firing. His first shot hit Captain Ernest Clark's seat, and the second hit him in the head, killing him instantly. Flight 773 then pitched nose down and dived almost 2,000 feet. First Officer Ray Andress wrestled to pull the aircraft out of the dive and regained some altitude, and whilst doing this, he was shot, critically wounding him. Around this time, air traffic control received a garbled message, which captured Ray's panicked final moments alive. It's unclear what he's saying exactly, but the best guess will be put on the screen.
Radar contact lost.
Gonzales then fired again, and this second shot killed Ray. With both pilots dead, Francisco Gonzales put the revolver against his temple and fired a shot into his own head, killing himself instantly. This all happened in front of the terrified passengers. They must have been horrified. However, the worst was to come. With no one at the controls, Flight 773 went into a steep, uncontrollable dive from around 4,000 feet before it slammed almost vertically into a hillside 3 miles east of the town of Danville. Air traffic control were trying to make contact with Flight 773 without response, and another pilot reported, quote, "There's a black cloud of smoke coming up through the undercast at 3:30, 4 o'clock position right now. Looks like an oil or gasoline fire." It was quickly realised that Flight 773 had crashed and emergency services were dispatched to the site. However, it became clear immediately there were no survivors. The plane had hit the ground at around 500 miles an hour and exploded, killing all remaining 41 passengers and crew instantly. The Civil Aeronautics Board, or CAB, the predecessor to the National Transportation Safety Board, descended on the scene to investigate the crash. In the wreckage, along with bodies and body parts, personal belongings, a Bible and paperwork, investigators found the damaged .357 Magnum Gonzales had used. The FBI also became involved, and it was between these two agencies that the most likely sequence of events which I presented was theorised about the final moments of Flight 773, as well as who was responsible. The CAB accident report stated that the cause of the crash was, quote, "the shooting of the captain and first officer by a passenger during flight." Unfortunately, in the immediate aftermath of the crash, the press formed their own opinions and began publishing speculative news stories without any consideration for the pain they were causing the victims' families. This included Captain Ernest Clark's children, which included twins Julie and Judy, who were 15, and Sharon, who was 18. In the space of a year, they had lost both of their parents. Julie later recalled that journalists camped outside their home for a month and was speculating that Ernest had potentially caused the crash because of grief resulting from losing his wife the year before. When the truth was published, this quelled most of these rumours, but the emotional damage was already done. Julie Clark later became one of the first female pilots to work for a major airline, and as well as this, she became an aerobatic show pilot for more than 40 years, a fitting tribute to her father. The crash of Pacific Airlines Flight 773 did lead to changes in the aviation industry, with Clark's Law, named after Ernest, being enacted 3 years later, requiring cockpit doors to be locked at all times on commercial flights. In addition, Flight 773 led to federal rules and legislation requiring that voice recorders be installed in the cockpits of all passenger aircraft. The question which was not answered at the time of the investigation, and which remains a mystery 60 years later, is why. Why did Francisco Gonzales decide to bring down the plane? We will never know. He didn't leave any notes behind explaining his actions. It appears that he was intent on going out in a blaze of glory. Not content with simply ending his own life, he wanted to take as many people with him as possible. He had threatened to do this to his own family, but it seems this was not grand enough for this coward, and he needed to also extinguish the lives of innocent men, women and children. Some reports I've read, however, seem to hint at Gonzales having done this to help his wife, trying to put some sort of noble spin on his actions, and this is due to him having taken out life insurance just before he stepped on the plane to Reno. I think this is a gross distortion of this man's mentality. Nothing he did was noble. Nothing he did was for anyone else. He was a selfish and evil man. We don't know much about Gonzales, but I imagine his wife wanted nothing to do with him for one reason or another, likely because he'd pissed away their money. Him taking out the life insurance policy was, I think, largely vindictive. By doing this, he linked her to this tragedy, with him saying, "Here's the money back, but look what I had to do to get it. What I did is partly your fault." Whether his wife ever received the insurance payout, which was around $100,000 or over $1 million in today's money, is unclear, but would she really want blood money? Regardless of why, the fact remains that although you've likely never heard of him, Francisco Paulo Gonzales remains the worst mass killer in Californian history. Thank you for watching. Please like, share and subscribe, and leave your thoughts in the comments below. Also, feel free to check out my second channel called Evil Among Us, which focuses on true crime. I'll put a link in the description. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one.